the biblical flood as portrayed into the Bible. A big passage that sticks out, obviously I actually don't have my Bible in front of me, but a big one that sticks out, I'd like to hear your explanation of it, that I think obviously clearly points to a biblical flood would be 2 Peter 3, which says that in the last days, there's going to be scoffers, walking after their own lust, denying two things, right? The creation, and I'd have to go look at the exact passage, but to me that indicates the flood, right? Yeah. Talking about how the earth that was, in and out of the water. So it sounds like in the last days, there's going to be two things that people reject and deny, which is the creation and the flood. And it seems like in that passage, it's describing a global flood. So how do you feel about that?
So as far as I know, in 2 Peter, there actually is another verse. I think I know what you're talking about, where it says, it's talking about the mockers and scoffers, and it says the world at that time. Or it says the world of the ungodly. I want to Google it on my phone.
I'm pulling it up right now. So then, because I think when it comes to like this type of, okay, so if I go here, actually, maybe we could take this passage by passage. So it says in verse 3, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming, right? Just like today, where is he? You keep saying the second coming of Christ, where is he? Is he coming? Blah, blah, blah. So it's certainly it's a strong prophecy of what we see and know today. And it says, for since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation, indicating uniformitarianism, right? Which is a strong assumption based on what Charles Lyell wrote, Charles Darwin, and obviously that whole ripple effect. But then it says here, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Now here's, because I've heard other people, like this one guy, Sentinel Apologetics or something, he said, oh, that's, creation. Okay, you think that's creation. What about this? The next passage said, the next verse says, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So that's indicating, obviously, the cataclysmic global flood. And that's talking about the entire world being overflowed with water, perished. And then it says, but the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So that's connecting. The global flood here is connecting to, obviously in Revelation where Jesus comes down at the Battle of Armageddon, and it's destroyed by fire. So obviously the whole world's destroyed by fire. We know in the end times. So how could anybody say that the verse before, which is talking about the global flood and the world that then was overflowed with water, how can that be local? Because this is contrasting the end times judgment by fire versus the Genesis flood by water. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. So when you read 2 Peter and it talks about the world of the ungodly or the world at that time, you got to look at the Greek. Because Greek is actually it's a more precise language than English. They can use
actually 1 second before you go to the Greek. Can you speak? So I really want to know Greek. Can you say, hey, I want to order a large. Hey, I want to order a double cheese combo. Can you say that in Greek right now?
No, I cannot.
Okay, well, you can't speak Greek. I can't speak Greek. We have English in front of us. Because one thing that bothers me is when somebody says, let's go back to a foreign language that's not going to be any more interpretable than what we're looking at in English. Because as much as is confusing in English will be just as confusing in a foreign language, Greek, Hebrew. So you're telling me you can't speak a simple sentence in Greek? Why should we go back to the Greek? Can you explain that to me?
Oh, yeah, that's the language it was written in.
Okay, but if you can't speak Greek,
that doesn't matter.
Greek, but you want to go back to the Greek, you're just going to go back to what some commentator wrote about what the Greek says. But at the end of the day, you can't speak Greek and I can't speak Greek. So why don't we look at the English in front of us, and why don't you explain to me what the world that then was being overflowed with water perished? How do you
that's not how you do it with an ancient text. That's just not how you do it.
You just admitted you don't understand Greek. You can't speak Greek. So why are we going back to the Greek?
You can go to different scholars who do know.
Okay, you just said you can't order. you're going to go back to some scholar. There's so much conflict in regards to what the English says, and you can go back to a bunch of different scholars about what the English says, but you want to go back to the Greek about what a bunch of different scholars are talking about the Greek, and even more confusing in foreign language. I mean, if you have to go back to the Greek, that's a sure sign that it's probably related to a false doctrine. Have you ever heard that before? That's the biblical 101, right?
The only people who I know who do say that are younger creationists, and honestly, it was in doing this research where I had to go to different scholars and go to different languages. It was a lot of work I had to do, where I had to come out of younger creationists.
Okay. Okay, can you say the word hello in Greek? What was the word hello?
I couldn't tell you.
So why are we going back to the Greek, bro? Come on, man. This is silly. Explain it to me in English. It says
I also don't need to, but that's
99% of the time that if we get James White in here, he might be able to, to teach me some Greek. But 99% of the times that I've talked about passages with somebody where the English is clear and they said, hey, we got to go back to the Greek or Hebrew, 99% of the time I ask them, oh, can you speak to me a sentence in Greek? Guess what? They never can. So I don't understand why we're going back to the Greek if you don't even understand the Greek.
That's how you look at an ancient text. You do that with any ancient text, not just the Bible. And you don't cherry pick because it is the Bible.
Okay, so can you just explain it to me in English, since we both have an English Bible here and we both have an English text here? What does it mean when it says?
It's actually null and void to talk about the English. You actually need to go back to the original language. You have to.
Well, we got to go back to the original language that you don't understand, that we don't even have. The earliest manuscripts are what? Came out in 300 AD. So if we just go by what the received text has given us through appropriate and sufficient translation, we have a beautiful text right here in front of us that's telling us that the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, and it's contrasting with the end of days destruction by fire, which was the whole world. I mean, this is, if you got to go back to the Greek, that's.
Do you think you're being a gatekeeper right now?
So what does the Greek say here, that if you want to explain it?
So in the Greek, when it talks about the world of the ungodly, there's two different ways to say world. So when you read John 3:16 is for God so loved the world, etc., it uses the word cosmos. In the text in Second Peter, it doesn't use the Greek word cosmos, meaning the entire world. It uses cosmos tote, the world of the ungodly.
Cosmos tote.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're saying where it says whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, you're saying that word is cosmos tote.
I think wherever it says the world of the ungodly.
Well, I'm looking at whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished. This is the global flood part. I'm not sure where it says the world of the do you have the verse up front in front of you? Because it's verse 6. It says that they are willingly ignorant of the global flood and the creation.
Or something. Hold on. Second Peter. Trying to find it. No, it's in Second Peter. It's talking about the world of the ungodly. Okay. Second Peter 2:5. I think I have it. I'm about to read it. It says, "If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on this ungodly people, but protected Noah." Or some verses say the world of the ungodly. This is like Second Peter chapter 2, verse 5. If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on this ungodly people, but preserved Noah. And what I'll do when we get done talking, I'll find it for you. But when it's talking about the world of the ungodly, it's talking about cosmos tote, and to me that was a very big part in my journey from journeying out of younger creationism, because when you would be right if the Greek was just cosmos, you do have this global event,
okay.
But cosmos tote.
Okay, but this word here, where it says whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, is that cosmos tote, or is that cosmos as in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life? Which word is being used here?
It may be cosmos, but even if I gave you that, it also still wouldn't matter because the ancient people, their perspective of the world was very different.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. You just okay. So in John 3:16, when it says, "For God so loved the world," obviously we know he's talking about he's talking about the world in general, whether you're Calvinist or not. Regardless, it would be everybody. Are you Calvinist?
No.
Okay, so obviously John 3:16, the word cosmos means the world, right? Everybody has the chance to be saved. So here, if this word here in verse 6, whereby the world that then was being overflowed with water perished, if that word's the same word in Greek as in John 3:16, then it is talking about the entire world. How could you say that it's not?
Are you familiar with cosmic geography? Or I'm sorry, ancient Near Eastern cosmology.
Yes, like the Mesopotamian flood, the local. See, how can you? So obviously, there's eisegesis and exegesis. Putting a local flood in this verse 6, I mean, that seems like the improper hermeneutics to me, because obviously, if it's, I mean, how can anybody look at this passage here? Are you looking at verse 6 and 7 here?
Of what is it, Second Peter?
So 2 Peter 3, verse 6, whereby the word. So this is what proves it, bro. Okay, you gotta just look at it. Okay, let's just look at it. The world that then was being overflowed with water perished. Okay, you want to say that's local flood. Okay, let's see what God contrasts that with in the next verse. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment. Are you trying to say that the day of judgment, God's wrath, is that going to be localized? Because if he's contrasting it to a local flood, and now he's talking about the day of judgment as by fire, that would have to also be localized. So which is it? Are they both local or are they both worldwide?
So that's a good point. And that's where you have to actually look at the look at the culture and look at the language and et cetera. So that's why I say, do you know about ancient Near Eastern cosmology? Because the ancient people, their perspective of the world wasn't how we see the world today. When we read Genesis, we have a tendency to look at the word like you said, just look at the English. We have a tendency to look at it like it was written for us. It wasn't. They had their own different sayings and ways of looking at the world and et cetera, which was different. So I mean, this it's not easy. That's why we do have scholars and we do have people in the field. It's not an easy thing. Your grandma can't just pick up the Bible
You
and
see,
understand.
for me, I have a commentary. It's called the Holy Spirit. And when the Holy Spirit is guiding me into all knowledge and truth, and I read 2 Peter 3, and it actually says that in the last days, there's going to be scoffers denying two things. And it talks about the creation, which atheists obviously deny, and then the global flood, which obviously atheists deny and apparently Christians deny. That is fulfilled prophecy right now, because to deny those two things and to see that those are the two things that everyone's debating about today, that's fulfilled prophecy. And if we look at the contrast of judgment by fire that we see in Revelation when Jesus comes on the horse, obviously, if we look at the global flood, it's either they're both localized or they're both worldwide. It can't be one of each. It just can't. It's forcing an interpretation into the text that doesn't belong there. I mean, that's hermeneutics 101. I mean, it just doesn't flow. Obviously, we could agree to disagree on that, but are you saying that based on what we know about geology, you don't believe that there is evidence that the earth was once underwater?
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with it. What has to do with it is one that the text itself, and you don't just look at one part of the Bible. You look at many different pieces. And so, like for example, like I said, this cosmic geography thing, or I'm sorry, ancient or Eastern cosmology. The ancient people believed that the Earth was flat. They didn't know anything about North America, South America, Australia. They didn't know about the entire world. For somebody living like what 2000 what BC, something like that, they didn't know anything about the entire planet. If I'm living in Mesopotamia in the Middle East and I go on the highest hill, all I see is Mesopotamia. I can't even see the other surrounding nations. So to me,
Okay,
that
so
is the entire world.
Okay, so why would Noah be told to build this huge ark, bring two of every kind? Why wouldn't he just tell them to move? And secondly, why would he tell birds to go onto the ark? Why can't birds just fly away if it's just a localized flood? Go ahead.
So it was a localized flood that it took out a lot of Mesopotamia. And if you look at where Mesopotamia is at on the map, It's surrounded by a lot of water. So why did God tell Noah to build a boat? So the boat wasn't as big as most people think. Like, remember, it's an ancient book, so you have to do your due diligence and find out, okay, what was the culture like at this time, and etc. Our number metrics in America are very big portions. If you go to other places, people say, "Man, you Americans eat a lot." It's because our portions of food are bigger because our measurements are different. The measurements in the Bible are sexagesimal, which means they had a base 60 number system. Our number system in America is base 10. We got 10 fingers. But a base 60 number system in the Middle East, like what 4,000 years ago, those measurements would have been very small. So if you actually convert the numbers from the flood account, the measurements of the ark would have been the size of a small yacht, which actually makes sense because Noah, in his time, he would have been a Middle Eastern farmer. The animals on the ark would have been small barn animals. So when God says, "Hey, bring two every animal into the," there weren't two of every animal in the world. There were two of every barn animal or farm animal from the Middle East, and he brings the farm animals onto the boat.
Okay, so your interpretation of the size of the ark that God instructed Noah to build is the size of a yacht, and you're saying
Yep.
that he only brought farm animals.
Yep.
So when he said two of every kind, and when he said that he's going to wipe off from the earth all of humanity and all flesh, you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to say that that's just talking about a few farm animals and a localized group of humans in this world of Mesopotamia. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, and you can actually reference Second Peter in that, where he talks about the author talks about the world of the ungodly. So it was flood to just dissipate the wickedest of people in the Middle East.
Are you talking about verse 7 where it says, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men? Are you throwing in the word world in there?
There is a verse I can't find her. I can't remember. It says something about the world of the ungodly. I'll do some more digging. I'll try it. It might be on my laptop somewhere. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at this stuff,
And
but
that
I'll find it.
and that's respectable. Obviously, we can agree to disagree there, but I find it funny that anytime that I ask anybody who's not familiar with this local flood, Hugh Ross style interpretation of Genesis and obviously of the whole Bible, because Second Peter 3 to me seems to be pretty evident that it's talking about global flood, but they always seem to say, "Oh yeah, of course this is talking about a global flood." Like it seems like something that you have to go to some type of scholar or leader and learn, but it's not something that you can actually read on your own and come to the conclusion of. So usually that's not a good sign. Isn't that usually a sign of, say, a cult, when you have to learn that from somebody else, what's not actually clear in the biblical text? Go ahead.
I would say no. Um, for example, if I were to show you like beta sigma mathematics or something like that, you wouldn't know what it is. You had to go to somebody who knows, like a mathematician. In the same way, when you look at the Bible, it's an ancient book. So any other ancient book, you would need to bring to a scholar. So why not bring the Bible to a scholar, and they can sit down and say, okay, this is what this is talking about, etc. I don't think it's a bad thing. Um,
And that's fine. We can agree to disagree. But if we actually look at the science aspect, so let's say we look at the Bible and you conclude a local flood and I conclude a global flood. Well, let's say we look at the empirical data. Okay. Well, what do we see? We see that there are marine fossils on mountains and in landlocked areas, obviously, that are all far from the sea. We see some sedimentary rock layers that extend over entire continents or even farther. And we also see that the deposition of those layers, they had to have been catastrophic, or else obviously there would not have been much fossilization, because fossilization takes rapid burial. Now, we also see different fossils, and just to name a few, we see fossils of animals giving birth, fish being eaten. I mean, what does this suggest? Sudden and rapid burial. But to actually look at a present day example on how this could have happened and how this could be explained, if we look at the eruption, and you might have heard this being a young Earth creation, if we look at the eruption at Mount St. Helens, that actually demonstrated that sedimentary layers, hundreds of feet thick, could be laid down in hours to days. We also know that canyons can be formed rapidly, and multiple fossilized forests can form as the result of one single volcanic eruption. We also seen through this eruption at Mount St. Helens how coal seams could be produced quickly. So obviously these observations we see, they are in accord with the flood of Noah covering the entire earth a few thousand years ago. So is that consistent with a global flood, or is that consistent with a local flood? And if you say a local flood, how do you explain all that phenomenon? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and this is less than I think, because I got to go to bed. But as far as that goes, I'm not really even up and up on on the geology of it. My field is more like astrophysics, physics. But what I will say is, uh, I couldn't tell you that. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked into this stuff. But from what I do know about the biblical text is that ancient people thought differently than we do, and they had in their mind they had you ever heard of the term pre-scientific notions and ideas and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's where people ought to look first, because what you believe about the Bible will shape your view on the world. And I would say the science is probably that's somewhere you probably shouldn't go first. Looking at like ancient Near Eastern cosmology, ancient Near Eastern cosmic geography, stuff like that. You definitely want to get a feel for the text in its proper view. So that's what I would say.
And that's understandable. I think just from our conversation here, because I was always curious. I'm like, okay, he had a discussion with Steve McRae, and I want to have a discussion with Steve McRae, but he hasn't. I'm not saying he doesn't want to, but I certainly want to have a discussion about the science aspect of evolution. So I seen that you came out of young Earth creation. I wonder why, because all the evidence points to young Earth creation and points to Ponscom to people evolution being a fraud. But from what I've discovered here, just one second, I'm almost done. And just seeing from this discussion, obviously, you keep going back to, I don't understand this stuff. I understand physics. So you gave up on young Earth creation, but at the same time, you don't even understand the arguments or realize the arguments against such evolution. And I just gave you all this evidence for a global flood, and then you just brush it off like it's nothing, and you go back to your Hebrew and Greek interpretation. So it's quite evident to me that it wasn't evidence-based. Why